Talk Radio, the KIDO Talk Radio app. It is free. It is wonderful. It is exciting. And by the way, we want to remind everybody that you can get it at the App Store. You can get it at Google Play. Kevin Miller in the morning. KIDO Talk Radio. We're joined by our old friend, Steve Yates. We still like to refer to him as the chairman of the Idaho Republican Party, although he gave that up many, many moons ago, probably years ago now. But Mr. Yates, thank you for joining us once again.
Thank you, Kevin. It's wonderful to be back with you.
You know, let's talk a little bit about you. You've been traveling the world. What have you been up to?
Well, I've been busy trying to work on things primarily that are U.S. and Asia relations. I have a small company that I started after I left the White House in the middle of the last decade. And after my time in politics here, I've gone back to focusing full-time on building up that business and getting active in that. It's taken me across the Pacific multiple times per year, and I've come and gone to Taiwan, Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, places like that. And given what's happening in the world, some of the friends in the White House that are trying to deal with things China-related, the Hong Kong demonstrations that are dominating news in recent months and continuing to do so. There's been plenty of work to do to try to give people the best advice I can and to, at the same time, outside of the trouble spots, try to give some advice to businesses to help them increase their markets.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what's going on with China. Here it is. What's going on with China?
Well, President Trump, as I'm sure as everyone has figured out by now, has spent most of his adult life focused on what he refers to as the bad deal that the United States has had with China economically. And I think that remains a very, very high priority for him. He's honored his commitment through the campaign to take a different approach to China and to try to use tools of pressure that other administrations have had but haven't used. To try to get a better deal for the American worker and to onshore some manufacturing and to try to stop some of what really have been some unacceptable practices there. He's the first president in my lifetime to do so. So he's really taken a different approach. And it's tough business because the Chinese aren't easy counterparts to try to deal with. They have pressure they try to put back on him. I admire his stick-to-itiveness in this, but those economic negotiations are a big, big part of what they're working on. But at the same time, China has concentration camps that have over 1 million Muslims in their far west. They're putting maximum pressure on places like Taiwan and Hong Kong that have had varying degrees of freedom and democracy for a long time now and don't appreciate the Communist Party trying to take it back. And we've got kind of a more international consensus that something's not right in China, and they're pushing in ways that are inappropriate. But I don't think that our allies and others have quite figured out what we can do together to try to change that course.
Now, for people that aren't familiar with your background, you're a rock star in Taiwan, right?
Well, I don't sing and I don't play an instrument well enough since I put the saxophone down after trying to mimic Billy Joel songs in my youth. But small confession there. But I do speak Chinese. I was a missionary in Taiwan in the late 1980s. I've come and gone to that part of the world for almost all of my career. My first job in government was working for an intelligence agency monitoring leadership and economic developments in China. And so while I've been blessed to work in a lot of different areas, this is kind of a core area of interest. And it just so happens, I think this is right now what people are witnessing in China and with regard to Hong Kong, possibly the most important strategic development of certainly the last decade. And so I think it's incredibly, incredibly important. So I want to do everything I possibly can to help the team that's in charge. I remain in the private sector, but one of the things I learned when I was in government is how to be useful from the outside, and that's what I aim to do.
Well, and in your travels, you do visit the White House. You still have friends in the White House. From your look inside as an alum of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, the president has changed the conversation, right?
Fundamentally, he has changed the conversation. Obviously, with a lot of things that President Trump does, there is some pop and sizzle out there in everyday commentary and coverage. And there's almost a cartoon that is made of him every day. Maybe not almost. There is a cartoon made of him every day. But there are some profound strategic changes he's made. He's fundamentally changed the narrative about, is the United States going to be an interventionist power, about regime change, nation building, things like that? And the answer is no. Is the United States going to put pressure on allies and friends to do their fair share? The answer is yes. And is he going to deliver a fundamentally different approach to revisionist or challenging powers like China? The answer is yes. So, I mean, there's a small basket of things that he's delivered. What any serious analyst would have to say is fundamental change, and dealing with China is one of them.
How is China viewed by Taiwan and Hong Kong?
Well, I guess to be precise, a lot of people in that area, and I should probably practice speaking this way more carefully myself, they would make a distinction between the Communist Party of China and the nation and people of China. There's a lot of respect for the culture and civilization, history, heritage, whatever you want to call it, about the Chinese people over thousands of years. But the communist era is an aberration. No group in the history of mankind has killed more Chinese people than has the Chinese Communist Party. And no group has actually hurt the economic development of the people of China more than has the Communist Party of China. Now, they claim they've brought people out of poverty, but that was poverty they put them in. And so it's one of the saddest developments of the 20th century to see the Communist Party of China take root. The people in Taiwan and Hong Kong, they see the current leader of China as a revival of Mao Zedong, a revival of the great proletariat cultural revolution of the 60s and early 70s, where families were destroyed, religions were destroyed, the economy was destroyed. And they're concerned about this weaponized ideological movement. And I say weaponized because they have the most advanced technology, huge amounts of capital, and a lot of advanced military capability, thanks to our very permissive policies that we've had for the last 4 decades.
Our great friend Steve Yates joining us, Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM, 580 AM, and the KIDO Talk Radio app. If from your time in Taiwan, of course, studying Chinese, being very familiar with that part of the world, how do you think the Chinese view the president? Obviously, again, he's unpredictable to his own people.
Yes, and I actually think that gives him strength. I mean, my time in the White House, I thought President Bush, George W. Bush, was at his best when he had a swagger and an unpredictability about him. Donald Trump is more than that. And it's frankly what's needed. Some of our toughest adversaries have come up with ways of coping with what traditional or conventional presidents try to do of either party. And so it took someone like a Donald Trump to be able to try to move the narrative and hopefully get some different outcomes. But when you ask what the Chinese people think, it's a little bit like asking what do the American people think. They're not a monolith. They certainly have a lot of information controls in place. They have a state media that doesn't allow for freedom of expression, and they have Facebook and Twitter equivalents because neither of those services are free to use inside controlled China airspace. But on those, they have bots and humans that will monitor what people say, and they will arrest, prosecute, persecute people for varying from the approved script of the communist propaganda machine. At the same time, the internet does allow for some information to get in there. There's some Chinese people who think that they admire the style of President Trump, and they see him as, well, they might not be able to say it publicly as much. They see him as the first person with the chutzpah to stand up and push back against their leadership, something that almost no one else in the world has been willing or able to do. And so it's divided. But I would wager to say the numbers of quiet admirers are very large in China. But 40 to 50 years of really militarized propaganda talking about China being a victim and Uncle Sam being the bad guy and all that, that has an effect too. So there's an element of brainwashing that sees this through a very nationalistic, pro-China lens when thinking of Trump and the U.S.
What about the Chinese leadership? How do they view the president?
Well, I think they view the president as a major problem. I think that the Chinese leadership has determined to wait out this election cycle and not make a deal with President Trump on the economic issues or any other issues because they frankly believe they'll get a better deal with a Democrat that gets elected. And they hope that they'll go back to some kind of a conventional leader where they've in some ways bought and paid for the advice that they get. The traditional sort of think tank academic pool of people that come and go to government, these are people that have been influenced by Chinese inducements, whether by access to the leadership or corporate inducements on the advisory work they do on the side. And so the Chinese think they can get a better deal with someone else, and they're probably going to play for some time and try to put the pressure on the president. But I think that they got bad advice in 2016, like a lot of other people in the world, and they're very likely getting bad advice again that Trump can't win in 2020, because I think his prospects for re-election in 2020 are stronger than his prospects for election were in 2016.
And we'll definitely get into that. Our great friend Steve Yates joining us. Kevin Miller in the morning. KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. Also available on the KIDO Talk Radio app. It is free. You can go to the App Store. You can go to Google Play. Get it. You don't have to go through any third-party person or aggregator. All you have to do is type in KIDO Talk Radio and you'll get it. In about a minute, what do you make of all the turnover recently at the White House?
Well, I've lived through White House life, and under normal circumstances, it's a high demand and it's churn. This is the season. If you're not in it for the full stretch of re-election and the first beginnings of the transition into a second term, this is the time to turn over. And if you're going to put someone forward to hopefully get a Senate confirmed place, this is the time to try to do it, although it's the time is running out on that. So I'm not totally surprised by some of the turnover. I have some friends that have made the departure, and frankly, after 2.5 years, they're tired and they need a change of pace. And that's, like I say, sadly normal for those kinds of jobs.
Now, how long did you last?
Well, I made the mistake of staying for 5 years,
which
probably either means I'm a total glutton for punishment or I wasn't smart enough to save my batteries and go out while the getting's good at the right time. So I stayed for 5 years, probably makes me less of a person than having.
I'm sorry. It was just.
True fact.
All right. More with Steve Yates next. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. Hope you're having a great day. One of our favorite guests, Steve Yates, joining us. We're going to talk Idaho politics. We're going to talk presidential politics. We're going to talk politics with our great friend Steve Yates joining us here. Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. So what would be your title? International Consultant, Man of the World, the most interesting man in Idaho?
I think just former who's-a-whatsy is kind of my official diplomatic title at this point. But no, I'm CEO of a company called DC International Advisory, and that fits just fine for what I do now. And we basically give advice to private clients the way my partners and I used to give advice to principals in government, whether it's the president, vice president, or cabinet secretaries. We just do it without the classified information now.
Indeed. You appear on television quite a lot. For people that aren't familiar with that, with what it's like, maybe they see you on Fox Business News, Fox News. Can you take us through that process? It's kind of like we're asking the magician to take us through behind the curtain. Is it a comfortable, fun experience?
Well, I enjoy it. I don't get compensated for it, so I obviously don't do it for the money. It also hasn't really translated into other kinds of material things, but I enjoy doing it. It's an interesting discipline to try to go before a camera or look into a black box and try to make your brain stop thinking about there's 1 million plus or 3 million plus people on the other side of this that are watching, and go ahead and just calm down and answer some questions in 2 to 3 minutes. Makes me like radio more, where I can be more of a natural animal and give a longer answer from time to time. But I've enjoyed my time. I've done a lot of TV since leaving the White House. It's been about 15 years now. And you meet interesting folks in the green room coming and going. You have interesting issues you get challenged to try to answer. But like I say, the real test that I find to be a rewarding experience is someone asks you a question and you got 30 seconds to answer it. You give it what you got. And the other part is truly humbling, because if you happen not to be available, there's no one who's so important that they don't have someone else they can fill the airtime with. So, when they offer, you try to do it when you can, but don't think you're a somebody, because as soon as you walk out that door, there's another somebody that will take your spot.
Sure. Toughest person that has interviewed you, you think?
Oh, I think the toughest interview experience I had was with Bill O'Reilly. And it wasn't because he necessarily grilled me, but he had kind of a formula for what he was doing on the O'Reilly factor. And as it was his show, it always made the host look good, sometimes at the guest's expense. And it didn't really much matter whether you were the liberal or the conservative that was coming on. But it was an interesting, fascinating kind of formula to go through. But trying to navigate that, I think, was probably one of the tougher experiences. I've been on with some liberal hosts. I've been on BBC where, you could almost hear the liberal anchor gasping at some of my pro-Trump answers after the 2016 election. And that wasn't hard. It was just kind of annoying. And so you can choose not to go back to programs that are like that.
Steve Yates joining us, Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. Let's get you to work safely and on time. Good morning, Dave. Once again, back with Steve Yates, Kevin Miller in the morning here, KIDO Talk Radio. So let's talk a little bit about something you alluded to last segment, that you believe the president will have an easier time getting reelected than elected.
Yeah, well, I would frame it as his reelection prospects are stronger. I still think he's going to have to work very, very hard. But I don't know if you've noticed the same thing, but when you watch President Trump do these press avails, and he doesn't do it from a podium or a teleprompter or even a press room. He stands by the side of a helicopter that's already started, and he's doing it in 90-plus degree heat in the direct sun in swampy Washington. And if you look closely, he doesn't bat an eyelash or skip a beat, but he is sweating like he's just come out of a swimming pool. But this man is a workhorse, and he will work through this process. We know that the Democrats and the media and everyone else is going to throw the kitchen sink at him. They'll call him every ist there ever was. And there's a lot of that has gone bonkers in recent times. That's only going to get worse. But it's very difficult substantively for Democrats to pin their finger on what exactly is so bad that has to change. He's fundamentally changed the narrative on China. Hard for Democrats to argue against it. They can do their own polls, and you can see their candidates having to adjust. Holy crap, maybe this guy is doing something right. Maybe he was correct about this. They can look at the performance of the economy. And on its worst day in the Trump administration, it's far better than the long 8-year average of the Obama administration by every measure. So what exactly is it that they would fix? There's things they can demagogue, but the data is against them. When it comes to trade policies generally, he's on the side of where the Democrats used to be, and their labor base knows it. Their leadership hates the president, but a lot of their membership appreciates what he's been doing. And so that coalition he built in 2016 in the Rust Belt states, it's not impervious, but it's really, really hard for the Democrats to go for that. And all the people that they're running right now are running to the Looney Tunes off the cliff left. And so the more that they stake out that extreme position, the safer the president is to go and get some independent voters. And while I don't want to admit it, he is polling much stronger among unaffiliated voters than anyone wants to report or admit.
And yet we had the blip in 2018. You also have a lot of Republicans apparently retiring again. What do you make of that?
Well, we're in a time of transition in our politics, and I think the parties themselves are transitioning. I'm a committed Republican, but what that means is something that evolves over time. So there are some Republicans who lost their positions, but some of them were trying to play games about not really being with the president. And so they divided their potential vote base, and you end up with some narrow defeats. We also have systems like that in California that can get gamed, where a Republican squeaks out a victory only to have it taken away in 48 hours because something happened with harvesting ballots. And so we'll go into this cycle with eyes wide open. But as time has gone on, I think a large number of Republicans are starting to see, yes, there's some madness in what the president does and has to deal with on the politics of this, but there's some substance of where he's been moving the country and what he's dealing with in the world that's working. He has stood by Israel and done some historic things to bolster that alliance. They said no new NAFTA could be negotiated. He negotiated a USMCA that still awaits ratification, but he did the negotiation. He did what they said was impossible. He has gone toe-to-toe with major adversaries like North Korea and China and some others. And while the dialogue isn't over, he's done a lot more than any previous president in recent memory to reset where U.S. interests are. And he's naming and shaming the Europeans and others that need to step up and carry their fair burden on things. And so those are all really strong areas for the Republican Party to organize around. There's the gun discussion that's current, and it's a point of, I think, some concern in some ways. But as long as we look at what the president has done and not what's said on any given day, he's been a very good Second Amendment president for his tenure.
More coming up with Steve Yates next. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. Kevin Miller in the morning. Don't forget our Girls with Guns competition open. We would love for your girl to win her favorite gun. Details at KIDOTalkRadio.com. Brought to you by Independence Indoor Shooting. Steve Yates joining us as we continue our morning conversation with Idaho's newsmakers here on KIDO Talk Radio. So we look at the reelect. Yet, I don't know. I don't know if you're part of the media, but everybody's denouncing the president. We've had these horrific shootings. What's it like inside the White House? And we always talk about your time September 11th, but when there is let's not go to that extreme, but when there is a shooting like we've seen in Dayton, Ohio, or El Paso, Texas in the last couple of weeks, what's it like inside the bubble reacting to those issues?
Well, there's a bunker mentality sometimes. I mean, it's sad that the country has gone through these things multiple times, but it's sad for reasons that people might not think of at the outset. I mean, what I find truly tragic is, of course, people forget that presidents and others are actual human beings. And when you work in a White House and you're up close with the people that are our presidents, you know that they care at a level that most people just don't comprehend about the well-being of the people. They love the country. That's why they run. So they have empathy for victims. They want to do something to try to help people. So there's a hyperdrive they go into about how do we stand with the people, how do we stand with the communities, how do we help people grieve and move forward and show that we care, et cetera, et cetera. That's one side of it. Then there's the politics of it, which I find to be the greatest tragedy of, the highest speed rail is between a demagogue and the TV to try to name and blame and seek advantage on tragedies. It's the old Rahm Emanuel complex of not letting a good tragedy go to waste. And so that's the worst part, where you see people trying to do that. And in the White House, there are people whose job it is to say these are where the shots are going to be fired, so to speak, at you. This is how you're going to be blamed. You're going to go out in front of the camera, in front of the helicopter or wherever else and take some questions. This is likely what the questions are going to be. What is it we want to say? Recognize we have different audiences. You have congressional leaders that are bombarding with phone calls and suggestions of, we need action. We need you to support this. This is what we think we can get. And so it's kind of a white hot stew of these different things. But for me, the most important thing that often gets neglected is just remembering these are people that have been elected that are kind of the embodiment of representing our republic. And I believe this deeply with President Trump. I mean, he loves our country and he loves our people. And no matter what our position is on guns and how people want to react to the crises, he cares about those communities. And he's trying to do his part to shore them up. And I think the First Lady does a great job in helping them with it, too.
Steve Yates joining us, Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. And yet, obviously, the president watches the shows. He's got thick skin, but they go after his family, and yet they didn't go after Obama. Why the double standard?
Well, everything is brave new territory when it comes to Trump. And of course, whoever the people are that are trying to attack him, whether it's certain television networks that do it 24/7, 365, it's basically their secular religion to try to define him as the great evil in the world. And they are on the right side of the angels trying to eradicate this evil. I think some of that is just based out of the resentment that he's someone that they said never could win. He's someone who's supposed to be this awful, terrible thing that no one would ever support, and he was going to fall apart. He wasn't capable. He was going to be impeached. The Mueller report, this and other kinds of stuff, and it's a lot to take in. But it's true that there's worse than just a double standard when it comes to how the president's treated. I mean, I worked in the Bush White House, and it was a time when George W. Bush was compared to Hitler and Satan and other kinds of things and Code Pink protests, and people forget all of that. But this is what the Soros-fueled leftist elites do. And with Trump, they've just gone bonkers to the 10th degree in trying to do it. And people you used to think were sane and rational are joining in on it, and so are 19 out of the bazillion Democrats running for president.
It is very strange. Our great friend Steve Yates joining us, Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio, the KIDO Talk Radio app. Now, we could go on and on about the presidential stuff, and I know you're going to give me the smack here or the Heisman on this one, but Idaho politics, I know you've been traveling the world.
What's that?
Exactly. You love the gem state. I miss you as chairman of the Republican Party. You understood what it was like to go out and meet the people. You brought the party together under challenging conditions. Our great friend David Johnston as well. My personal opinion, I miss that. But Idaho politics, we've got a new chairman, the congressman that you know very well, former Congressman Raul Labrador, beating out the former state school superintendent Tom Luna by 2 votes. You've been in those backroom meetings. What do you make of that very competitive election that happened here in Boise?
Well, first and foremost, I do know very, very well what the challenges are of being a volunteer party chairman. It takes a lot of time and commitment from anyone who does it. And if you want to try to steer the cats or move politics of any size in any way, I mean, it really takes a lot of effort. And that's not to pat myself on the back or anyone else. Obviously, I'd give high praise to everyone I was fortunate enough to hire and work with when I was chairman, and they deserve a lot of the credit for the hard work that was done. But I had to give a lot of time and travel a lot around the state to try to engage in conversations and build relationships and try to professionalize what we were doing, what we were about, promote a platform, organize to advocate those values, to conduct fair nominating processes, and then when the election time came around, to beat the streets for our nominees. I always called those the fundamentals. Every sport I ever participated in was a coach that was just adamant about if you don't do the fundamentals, you don't get to run the trick plays, and you might not even get time on the court or on the field or whatever your sport was. And I really believed that about politics, and try to make it not about you, but about the brand and the success of others who are trying to get on the ballot and run. So those were really, really high priorities. I don't think anyone in their right mind would run for the chairmanship of a state party thinking that it's going to be a launching pad to important other things. And I certainly don't know what former Congressman Labrador's thinking was in running for chairman, but I trust that it wasn't that. And I also have not been traveling around the state as much as I once was, because I've been tending to family and work a bit more, to know how his travels around the state have been going since he's been elected chair. But it takes a lot of effort to try to get people to focus on what's kind of the boring stuff of party politics. But when you get that right, good things happen. and other people can succeed and other people can look good. But right now, I think Idaho is making national news for the work that's being done on deregulation. That's a great conservative issue. Donald Trump kind of set the standard when he got inaugurated. He was talking about for every regulation that comes forward to have to come off the books, and I think he's done better than that on average. And Governor Little's administration has done an Idaho version of that, and there's some solid people that have been organizing that work. I think that's great and laudable. I would think it's something that the party faithful would recognize is good for anybody, no matter what their stripe is in the Republican Party. So there's at least something that's happening that people can unify around and rally around, and that's a blessing. I mean, my time as chairman, there were a lot of centrifugal forces that were pulling people in different directions, kind of tribal warfare in ways, and you do what you can to emphasize the commonality, but that's just a constant gardening that needs to be done. And, not everyone cares what a party chairman thinks. I mean, people have good reason to ask why in the world they care what I think anyway. But you're a party chairman and you're dropping in to try to give some advice or help or whatever. Some people take the advice and you work with them, and some don't. But it was a wonderful experience for me. I trust it'll be a really educational, a wonderful experience for Chairman Labrador. And I certainly hope the party's success in doing those basics and keeping Idaho as red as it possibly can be.
Well, and we do see the libs moving in, but I don't think a lot of people understand the endless hours on the road in solitude away from the business that feeds your family and your family that loves you.
Yeah, that is, it's different for everybody. But, there's some chairmen in some states, it's a compensated position. I was an advocate for that, not because I could be compensated. I made clear that it'd be fine if the compensation kicked in after I was chairman. I was willing to make the sacrifice while I was a volunteer one. But people think, well, you're taking advantage of this or that. It's if you're a conservative and you believe in value for value and market forces, if you want the best quality out of the best people, then that means you probably should find a way to reward and compensate people for doing the work that you've asked them to do. So I would encourage people to think on that. I don't think there's an easy answer to it, but since I have absolutely no skin in the game, I'm certainly not advocating for myself or anyone that I know. But I do think that there's a significant price paid on that. And in terms of the time, Idaho is a geographically large state, 2 time zones, as North Idaho will remind us from time to time. And sometimes you have to go through other states to get to other parts of our own state efficiently. And, there's a lot of time in the road. Windshields get chipped and cracked and tires get worn, and you learn how to make a lot of phone calls and where you can't make phone calls. You get to meditate in those times where there's no data signal and you can't get emails and whatever else. But I killed a few animals with my car accidentally a couple of times. And I certainly killed thousands and thousands of bugs, driving across the state. But I wouldn't change it for anything, though, just because you really meet fascinating people, and some who are struggling, but you learn from, some who are successful and you learn from, some who challenge you, and you're involuntarily forced to learn from them, and then some who just become good friends. And, I was fortunate to meet you before I was chairman, so I think with reasonable confidence say I would have been friends with Kevin Miller in the morning, whether I'd been chairman or not. But there's a lot of other people around the state, but for that experience of being chairman, I never would have met them. And it's been a blessing in my life.
Well, you're a blessing to all of us. Our great friend Steve Yates joining us. One more segment with him coming up. Do want to remind you that KIDO Talk Radio, we're very proud of this. Want to thank our parent company, Town Square Media. The Spirit of Boise Balloon Classic coming up. More details at our website, and you can get our app for free. Maybe you're tired of me talking about it, but it is neat. We hope to earn some valuable real estate on your phones. You can get it at the App Store, Google Play. It doesn't cost you anything. All you have to do is look for KIDO Talk Radio. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. Time flies on the right side, and really it gets no righter than our great friend Steve Yates joining us here. Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk 5 FM, 580 AM. So we're worried about the libs moving in. Now, you're an East Idaho guy. Eventually, I need to go there and hang out with the good people. Not that we don't have great people here, but that part of the state, at least by its reputation, has a more conservative vibe than here in the Treasure Valley. Agree or disagree?
Well, if you look at the demographics of who's moving into the state and from what geographies, there's a much, much higher percentage of people moving into the Treasure Valley and the Coeur d'Alene area than there is moving into the eastern Idaho corridor. And there is, I think, a general feeling in this part of the state where, there's a separateness from the buzz of what's happening in the world, and that's a positive thing. So there's still wide open spaces. There's plenty to do, but it's a little bit slower pace of things. So there's work related to the INL, the nuclear research site in the eastern side of the state that will draw some people from around the world and from the East Coast and others into the community. But otherwise, it's a relatively traditional migration plan. But you have Silicon Valley exiles that are going into the Treasure Valley. You have the California taxation exiles. You have people who are just looking to be house rich by selling expensive Pacific Coast real estate and bringing a little bit of their politics into the Treasure Valley. That's a real challenge. And we want to think wisely about how we compete and brand and marshal our people, and the sort of reactive, passive approach to politics where people assume reelection and safe seats is not going to be the case in some of those Treasure Valley areas going over the long term. I hope that we work hard and we hold them. But in East Idaho, you still have really strong support for conservative values. The Republican Party brand is still fairly strong. There's competition among people who want to personalize politics. That's the cancer of politics that people should be careful about. But generally, if you're just asking people, you scratch them on the surface and they're gonna bleed conservative, and that's perfectly fine, and it's a nice way of life here.
More coming up next. Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. Let's get you to work safely and on time. Good morning, Dave. Always appreciate the great, accurate, and dependable weather reports from Channel 7. Steve Yates joining us, Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. I'm worried about the libs moving in. What do you think?
Well, so far, so good on the eastern side of the state. I think when it comes to the Treasure Valley, that is a concern that is getting greater, and it's not likely to wane. California has run itself into a garbage dump in many, many ways. The descriptions about needles and excrement on the street in downtown San Francisco, within range of some of the richest global headquarters, is just a great travesty. It's just liberalism run amok, and all of the signs are outward and gross. And then there's the high taxation and high cost that's pushing people away. When they're looking for a beautiful place that they can live with easy access to outdoor activity, hey, Boise's got a lot, and its neighboring cities have a lot to go for them when they're looking at that value proposition. So that's going to be a challenge, dealing with development and dealing with the shift in politics. But there's still ways that we can be competitive if we're smart and we work hard and we turn out our people. Turnout is ultimately the single most important thing in politics. It's dramatically underappreciated, and it takes the candidates and the party doing their part to be worthy of turnout, but it also takes people getting off their duff and stop complaining on Facebook, get away from their phone and their computer, go vote. And we can always do better on our turnout percentages.
Well, you must be concerned that Idaho's largest county, we've got two liberal Democratic county commissioners now. It flipped. Now we have just one Republican Ada County commissioner, and we've got two hardworking female liberal Democrats that say, hey, I'm not a lib, but look, and you got Julian Castro coming in, Joe Biden coming in to take our money. It's blipping on the lib radar here, it would seem.
No, that's absolutely true. And remember, President Obama came through, too, to check the Idaho box and covering all the states. But it's definitely true that trends have gone in that direction. And I don't want to disparage what anyone has tried to do in the past, but we have to have competitive quality candidates, and we have to have people who are committed to being professional about organizing in the party. And I mentioned it before, but I really mean it. The personalization of politics is the cancer in party politics. And we've got to be willing to do the boring work for other people's success. And it's a human struggle in politics generally, but in Ada County, they have struggled in terms of trying to get people to hang together for the brand, to work, to do the volunteer work. And it's been a little bit of a war of the roses. You can cast aspersions on either side, but it's been a challenge that the people there have lived with. So I'm not making this up from, this is my agenda. This is what people there tell me from all angles. And so if we're going to get serious about getting good people elected to counter that trend, we've got to find a way to fix the party support structure too.
I'm going to ask you something insightful. Hopefully you'll like this one. I love the advice that your former boss, Dick Cheney, gave to you about getting along with people.
Yeah, it's one of the truisms of life. Don't make it hard to be my friend, or don't make it hard for me to be your friend.
Right.
Sorry, I got it wrong. So I'm getting ready to run for legislature in East Idaho, and I was asking my former boss for support, and he was calling up some of his friends in Idaho and asking what they thought of me and my prospects and things like that. And when he was calling to say that he would make a contribution and he would write a letter of endorsement, he said, "Now I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to understand it." He said, "Don't make it hard for me to be your friend. I am your friend, but I have other friends. And so never forget that your friends have equities beyond you. And if you're going to be a good friend, you don't force them to have to choose between the friendships they have and the friendship they have with you." And I felt a little bit hurt by that at the time because I have very delicate sensibilities. But it's one of those things that, like you said, it sort of sticks with you. And there's a dose of experience and wisdom in that kind of gets you focused right.
Well, Mr. Yates, we always appreciate you. We thank you for your time, and safe travels, and stay out of trouble.
Thanks so much, Kevin. Great to be with you.
Thank you. You're listening to Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio, KIDO Talk Radio app.